away at the speed of the sound of the road.
Hello and welcome to Fly With Your Shadow, a podcast featuring conversations about the lives of people who make music, including career-based issues like mental health and illness, addictions, uncertainties, and the devastating effect of the COVID pandemic. My name is Jeff Robson, and this show comes to you from my home in Winnipeg, Manitoba. While the show started as and will continue to be a place for honest and open conversations about mental illness, addictions, and other devastating issues facing people who spend their lives making music, the renewed focus will include conversations with people who have faced unbelievable obstacles in their pursuit of a life as a creator of art. To me, the music industry seems to be one of the most unfair ways of making a living that there is. You'd think that natural talent, hard work, and determination should be enough to make you successful at just about anything you set your mind to doing. But the reality is that people who get famous and people who find the most success in music aren't always the ones who are the most talented or put in the most work. All too often, people can put in their heart and soul, blood, sweat, and tears into their music and still have difficulty paying their bills. Today's guest is a perfect example of this.
It's been a little slow, though time would not agree, for time is more a measurement of possibility. So when there's nothing going on.
My name is Jory Nash. I am a veteran singer-songwriter in the Canadian folk music scene, and I made 9 records between 1997 and 2017, and then I unceremoniously disappeared and retired in 2019, or walked away, or grabbed my marbles and left the sandbox, to mix my metaphors. And now I'm made a decision to give things another try in a maybe in a less stressful way. But yeah, so I don't want to say I'm back, but I'm certainly looking to play select shows and certainly planning to make another record later this year.
Failure only takes its toll when you lose your self-control. Every bit of failure gives me hope to rage against. I'll make it, you know. I gave it my best, you know. I've tried.
I first got to know Jory Nash over 20 years ago. His albums, songs, and shows have always been impressive. He's toured extensively throughout North America. He's been featured at festivals and concert halls all over Canada and the US. In 2009, his album New Blue Day topped the prestigious Penguin Eggs magazine poll of music critics, artists, and presenters. He's also the co-founder and was for nearly 20 years the director of a multi-artist tribute to Gordon Lightfoot called The Way We Feel, which was not only approved by Lightfoot himself, but featured regular appearances by him as well over the years. With acclaimed albums, regular touring, truly engaging and entertaining shows, and a high-profile tribute show with his name attached to it, somehow still Jory was unable to make a fair living doing what he does best. So unfortunately, a few years ago, he decided to step off the stage and put his music career in the past. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to visit Toronto, and I got to see a show called Homeward Bound, an intimate evening of Simon and Garfunkel's greatest hits, and it featured none other than Jory Nash. I knew that Jory was a big fan of Paul Simon, and one of his most obvious influences, so it didn't surprise me to see him on the bill. It was very obvious that he was back where he belonged, on stage singing songs and telling stories, even if they weren't his own. A little while later, Jory announced that he was planning on giving music another shot by recording a new album and booking some shows again. I couldn't wait to catch up with Jory Nash to find out all about his return to music and to find out more about the factors that led him to stepping away in the first place.
Bad news, I don't wanna hear it. Bad news, tell it to the dog.
Can you just give me like the backstory? How did you get mixed up in this crazy racket of music anyway? What brought you to music as a career in the first place?
Well, it's a great question. I in Toronto, my hometown, in 1982, a school started that was patterned after the Fame School in New York, the one that the movie Fame and the TV show or whatever, and an art school for talented young kids. And I had a teacher in grade 4 who really believed in a talent that I didn't even know I had, singing. And I was always singing in her choirs and whatever, but I didn't really think of it. I liked sports. And they had this audition, and I went to it. It was like every Sunday for 9 weeks, or we went and we just did theater games, or we did dance. I didn't even know. It was just something to do on a Sunday. And towards the end of that school year, in grade 4, I got a letter that says, you've been accepted into this brand new, first of its kind in Canada art school. Please answer within a week if you want to attend. And I got in a fight that day with a kid that I was friends with. And I came home and my mom says, do you want to go? I said, yeah, I don't want to go back to my So I went to this art school, and I went from grade 5 right through to through high school. And in the early years, you did everything. You did a little bit of visual art, you did dance, and then as the school kind of found its footing, people selected majors, right? A major was your area of strength of which you would focus on, but they let you pick it. They didn't tell you, you're really good at singing, you should be a music major. I picked dance, even though I was very good at it. So I did dance as a major for 4 years, and music was really just a background thing. But I also, concurrent to that, I was playing violin, I was playing piano, but it wasn't anything I thought about. But I went at summer camp. Fast forward a few years, at summer camp, I had a counselor who played James Taylor and folk music on a guitar, and all the girls loved him. So I'm like, I want to do that. So I came home and I borrowed a guitar from a family member and took lessons, and something clicked. The sound of an acoustic guitar was always something that attracted me. Even back when I was younger, my parents were folkies, but they didn't play musical instruments really. My dad tried banjo, but it wasn't but the guitar, Paul Simon, Gordon Lightfoot, the sound of these records that we had, and it was always the sound of an acoustic guitar that it's just the first time I had it it was, I don't want to say it was made to be, but it clicked. I've never owned an electric guitar. I've never played electric guitar. I just, something about the acoustic guitar, and I started writing songs and did that in high school, and spent a lot of time, in kind of bands and playing with friends. And then high school ended and I went and did a science degree. I gave it up and I did a Bachelor of Science, but all the time I was like, I'd rather be playing music. And when I got my degree, I went and worked full-time in retail at a music store for a couple of years, saved up enough for money, and made a record. That was 1997. And then, and I did this record. And I remember I went on a university, the University of Toronto had a radio show, and the host of the show, I had my CD, and it was my first, and I was very, I don't want to say humble, but it was kind of, I had a weird attitude. I was didn't want to be anti-bragging or whatever. And he said, Jory Nash, this is your first professional music recording. And I said, well, I don't really consider myself a professional yet. I'm just starting out. And the guy on air, he goes, excuse me, this CD, are you charging people money for this CD? I said, yeah, it costs $20. He says, so you're taking money from people? He said, yes. So you're a professional. Start acting like it. So that was an on-air lesson. And I took it to heart. I agree with him in retrospect. At the time, I was horrified. But that was kind of where I was yeah, okay, I am doing this. I'm playing gigs where people are paying money, and I'm asking people to give me money for a CD. I am doing this professionally, and I better damn well learn to do it well. So I spent the next 5 to 10 years learning how to make records, learning how to perform on stage in a way that was engaging to people that weren't friends or family. That was a big thing, because in your early years, your fans are mostly your friends and families and friends of friends. But in the end, you want people who have no vested interest in you other than that they like what you do artistically. That's what separates people at the start, right? So when I started having a fan base who had no ties to me except for their love of what I did, that was when my career took off. and took off in a way. And when I mean it took off, it was in the sense that for the next 10 years or so to 15 years, I was able to make a living doing music full time. And that was, from between CD sales and gigs and royalties from radio play. And it worked. And it was a golden time, because it was a time where you could make a record on your own, be independent, and people were supportive of that. If anything, I remember the first time I built a website and people were like, I can buy music directly from the artist. I can talk to the artist via email. Wow. And then slowly over the next 10 to 15 years, that became, I'm not signing up I don't want emails from you. I'm not paying music. Music is, first it was downloads, and then it became streaming, and then it was a slow devaluation of the art of the music. It wasn't that people don't like music and like attending music, as it's just that they weren't willing to pay for it anymore. And the same thing was happening in movies and other aspects of entertainment. The problem is that a third of the income that I made was reliant on music sales. And so if that disappears, more and more artists started going on the road to make up the difference. And there weren't more gigs, but there were more artists chasing after the fewer and fewer gigs. And then if radio play disappears, like if a record of mine gets picked up and played on CBC and Sirius XM, the royalties were considerable. If they don't, a whole part of your hope for income kind of disappears. And that's what started to happen. The radio play that I'd been getting disappeared. The gigs were harder to get. And then I had a kid, and that made touring even more hard, and then touring in the States became harder because of visa costs and all those things. And everything became more expensive, and it just didn't make sense. And then I put a record out in 2018 that I was very proud of. I thought was one of the strongest thing I'd done. And it didn't do very well. Not in terms of response. It just didn't, the programmers on the CBC didn't pick it up. The Sirius XM, I couldn't get gigs to promote it. And it just became a spiral. And I decided, you know what? I can't do this. I have a little baby. It's heartbreaking to do that, to put this out and to not have the kind of response that I've had in the past, and quite frankly think that it deserved. And I just had to, I was kind of, I was very defeated, emotionally defeated, artistically defeated. And I kind of closed my guitar case up and stopped playing, and I didn't do shows, and I kind of stopped and then COVID hit. And then other things happened health-wise. My wife got very, very sick, and we had to deal with that. And suddenly years went by, and then it was like 6 years, and I barely played at all, hadn't written a song in 7 years, and sort of like, I'm not really a musician anymore. And my son, who's now 7, about a year ago, he said, "Daddy, will I ever get to see you perform?" And I'm like, I don't know, buddy. I don't know. And then just something last summer, I was, as you know, I'd done this long time celebration of the music of Gordon Lightfoot. We did it when he was alive as a multi-artist celebration. We did it, you saw it in Kenora, Jeff. You came to Kenora when we did it there. And we did it every year in Toronto and took it on the road sometimes. Anyway, and Gord sadly passed last year, and the Mariposa Folk Festival called me up a month and a half before the fest and said, "Can you put a version of that show together and do it on the main stage to open the festival?" And we did, and it was so gratifying to celebrate Gordon in that festival, but it also, on a personal level, it was just really fun to play and be surrounded by musical friends again and great music at the festival. And I brought my wife and my son, and they got to see it and all that. And it just kind of lit a spark. And then I did a house concert here in my hometown of Cobourg, Ontario, where I live now, last fall. Just 30 people. And I said, I'm going to write a new song for that. That was my goal. Write a new song, force it. And it came, and I did the show, and I had a really good time. Just enjoyed playing again, which was something I hadn't for a long time. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm not going to do it half-assed. I'm going to do it. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. I'm going to write songs that I want people to hear and I want to play. And that's what I'm doing. And that's where I'm at right now. So, I don't want to say it's a comeback or a renaissance, but in some ways it is. My wife said to me, says, okay, you're going to do this. Great. Cause she's been my biggest supporter. Like she's the one that married an artist, and I suddenly became not an artist. And that's all she's ever wanted me to do, is to follow my art. But she said, you can only come back once, so don't blow it.
Well, I don't know if that's true. I've seen lots of people come back enough time. I mean, how many farewell tours of the Who done? I mean, you can come back more than once, but hopefully we don't have to. You're allowed to take breaks, and you're allowed to go do other things. But let's only quit the once. Maybe let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's true. Better. That's true.
But when your career let's take me back to when your career was sort of at its busiest or whatever. How many shows a year are you doing? Where are you going? Like, what does your life look like at that point? And maybe what record or what year do you think would have been sort of your busiest or your highest profile, maybe?
My busiest years were 2009, 2010, 11, 12.
Okay, so around the New Blue Day record.
Because the New Blue Day came out and it won the Penguin Eggs Album of the Year. And I was actually on tour out west when I got the news that it had been voted. And I met a reporter in Edmonton area. His name was Mike Sadova, and we met at a coffee shop and talked about it. And I didn't quite realize how big it was. And at the same time, there was a song on that record that Sirius XM picked up on the Coffee House channel, which is one of their biggest. And suddenly I was getting download sales, like 10, 12 downloads of the song sales. It was every day for like 3-4 months. And and so then the next record I put out, CBC played the heck out of it, and Sirius XM played the heck out of it. And so I was doing 100 shows. About 100 shows. I toured a lot in Canada and a lot in the U.S. Northeast and Central states. I would go down and, I would basically go hard for 3 or 4 weeks and then come home for a bit. And I was doing, I'd say 30 to 40 of those 100 shows would have been house concerts. I really like house concerts. It was always, in my opinion, I played your house. It was the way to, I think that best showcases what I do solo. And that is a mixture of song and story. Right. And I can really connect. I love playing festivals. I love playing soft seat theaters, folk clubs, but in a house concert setting, I don't have to have a sound system. It's got a real intimate sound, and the kind of stories that I'd like to tell really can connect. And so for me, the house concert was a wonderful part of the glory years for me. And I still am. I'm doing more house concerts right now that I have booked than anything else, as I'm starting to book shows. It's a lot of house concerts that are on the docket. And so, about 100 shows a year, and maybe, maybe every year for about 10 years, I was doing 2 to 4 festivals in the summer. And then everything kind of dried up at once. And it was hard for me to understand. You go through a lot of stages, like, why is this happening? What am I doing wrong? And then I do liken it. I liken it almost like the cod fishery. You got the cod, it wasn't the fishermen's skills that changed. Suddenly the cod disappeared. And they could, and so that's what it felt like. It felt like a lot of the rules kind of flipped, and I don't think I did a great job of adapting. I never made a music video that I didn't quite understand from an early stage the power of YouTube that other artists did, to my detriment. So there were mistakes that I definitely made and choices that I made that I think contributed to the decline that I suffered. And then some of it is just, bad luck at times and bad choices, and just the way it is.
Well, I mean, a lot changed with society and your life kind of at the same time. So there was a lot of pull for you to go do something else, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess it wasn't. Yeah, I never really wanted to. I always at the heart of it wanted to play and have always wanted to play music, but the disappointments just became too much to overcome. And then it became a financial issue as well, because when you're not making money, suddenly you can't pay your mortgage. And I sold my condo, and we were renting for a while, and renting in Toronto, which is a city that is like Vancouver and Toronto rents well before the national crisis was, ridiculous. So yeah, it just became, and then again, COVID kind of took 2 years away from everybody. And then suddenly I look up and it's 6 years have gone by. It's kind of nuts.
So, I mean, is just to break it down so that people understand, like the finances of being an artist changed so much. Is it largely because people stopped buying CDs at shows? Was that where you were making enough money for it to make sense? Because I got to believe you could still get 100 shows a year if you wanted to. They might not necessarily be bigger shows, and I know festivals you talked about were being a bit hard, but was that sort of a big tipping point, losing out on people all of a sudden not buying albums at shows?
Absolutely. The losing album sales was a third of my income. I basically would say it was maybe 40% live show, 30% CD album sales, and 30% royalties. And I lost, like everybody, album sales. Everybody did, and at the same time, for whatever reason, the last record got almost no airplay on the kind of stations that generate large royalties. The national broadcasters and the Sirius XMs, and it didn't get picked up. And so I basically lost 60% of what a record had made, and I put a lot of money into it. I did a crowdfunding for the last record, and the budget was about $28,000, and I raised about 17. So the rest of it came out of pocket, and I still lost money. I didn't sell enough of that, so it was that was 7 years ago, and the economics of making even worse. Like you cannot recover your money from it. You cannot, unless you get song placements, or you get so much airplay on the Sirius XMs and CBC national radio type of things. It just cannot be recouped. And it doesn't happen for too many artists, or if it does, it's short. So yeah, so that's where for me it was the double blow of not getting the usual radio play, which radio play generates some sales, and radio play generates interest that can lead to gigs. And and then I also didn't get bookings. I think I played 6 shows to promote that's all I could get were 6 concerts to when the last record came out. And this is, previously I would do 100 shows a year and I could get 6. And you wonder, what am I doing wrong? And I think some of it, the business changed, and I really didn't change with it. And I used to do it all myself, like everything. I booked myself, I promoted myself, I produced the records, and I took a lot of pride in that. And I remember I got a booking agency in Toronto, a very reputable booking agency. I'd always thought I wanted to be with a booking agency to take that away. And I finally got a call from them. I was like, finally, they're seeing I'm playing all these shows. They gave me a call, and they said, we'd like you to come work for us as an agent, because you're booking so many shows. They're like, what? What about the fact that I was, so. And I think that I did also, and this is in retrospect, I did sit on a lot of board. I was on the board of Folk Music Ontario. I was on the board of the Northeast Regional Folk Alliance, and I also became an artistic director of a festival. And I remember being at a conference, and an artistic director of a festival who had never booked me before said, "Welcome to the artistic director world. You're not an artist anymore." I'm like, what? I can't do both? That was how it was viewed. There was a weird kind of delineation that I didn't see myself as only one or the other. I said, I can do both. But many enough people in the business took it as a delineation, and the gigs just stopped coming. And I wasn't able to figure out a way to get them back. And in the end, it just kind of broke me. I just ran out of energy. And at the time I had a newborn, and any parent knows that your energy is not what it once was. So it just, yeah. So I don't think it's one thing. It was a culmination of a lot of things that resulted in just me losing, not confidence in my art. I never lost confidence. As I said, I still think the last record I did is one of the 3 best I've ever done. And I've done
incredible.
9 records, but it didn't connect, and I don't know why. And I lost confidence in my ability to be an independent artist, not as somebody who makes art. Again, the separating the art from being able to make a living from artists. I just lost the confidence, and with the confidence came depression. And with depression comes motivation issues and lots of things in it. And it seeps into all aspects of what you're doing. It seeped into my relationship with my wife. It seeped into how I was a parent, and not very good. And finally it was like, if I keep this way, I'll be dead, because the depression. And so I walked away and tried to rebuild and try to find something. And in some ways I did, but in many ways the hole was always there. The emotional hole from not making art. And so that's the biggest difference right now, is that I'm approaching this. I'm not going to sell lots of records. I may not get any airplay with this next record, but I'm going to do enough gigs and find a balance that allows me to play shows that make sense, that will be enjoyable, that I can do and give what I'm best at in a way that I feel positive. And there'll be, and I'll have other things on the side to augment a living to pay the bills. But I have to look at the art and do it like I started the first, and like the art has to be focused. And I mean, it's just, and maybe I'm just tired. Maybe it's just older, and it's something that most people realize earlier than I did. So I don't know. When I say I'm doing this again, I still doubt I don't think I'll ever make the kind of living where it wasn't riches, but I was making $60,000 to $70,000 a year. That's what my gross would be, right? Which is a decent living. I could pay my bills, put a little bit of savings away, and do what I needed to do, and I was happy. And so I'm under no illusions. That's never going to happen again. But if I can make enough and combine it with other things, and we can pay our bills, and I'm still able to make music, and I'm not feeling the kind of defeat and depression that went along towards the end last time, then I think I have found a winning formula for me.
I talk to a lot of musicians. Obviously, I don't know what it's like. I'm not a musician, but it's easy for me to kind of sort of have a different perspective, I suppose. But it really made me so sad when a guy with such talent like you are one of the most naturally gifted performers I think I've seen. Just the way you sing and tell stories, and just your comfort and ease with doing that job. And the amount of effort and pride and quality control that you put into your records, that last record in particular, Wilderness Years, I mean, the art is stunning. You, as usual, had amazing guests on it and great producer, and everything is done the right way. And then it's hard for me, and obviously hard for you, to reconcile how you can do all those things right and be so good at your job and still not get ahead of so many other people who seem to get ahead for all the wrong reasons.
Yes. To all of that, yes, I agree. And I don't have an explanation. I just think that 6 years ago, that in a nutshell, everything is what you said is why I had to walk away. Now, 6 years later, I need to be able to understand that can happen, and yet still find a way to not walk away and not be defeated by that. That's the challenge. That will be my challenge. But at the same time, I used to believe firmly for 20 years. I firmly believe that if you work hard enough at your craft and do what I did, and the cream will rise. I believed that. I don't believe that anymore. I believe that the cream does not always rise. And that's just unfortunate. It sometimes does, and very rarely do abysmal artists become successful. But there's a lot of good to very good artists who, for whatever reasons, and there's a whole bunch of become way more successful than geniuses. And I've met a few geniuses. I don't consider myself nobody should consider themselves a genius, but I've met a few artistic people that I believe are geniuses who have had as much trouble as I have the last 6 years. A woman, Laurie Cullen is a Toronto singer-songwriter. I believe Laurie Cullen is a generational talent, a writer, an arranger. She hears things artistically, hears harmonies that only the Stevie Wonders of the world hear. I've seen it up close. Yet, and on stage, she's funny and engaging and moving. Her records are superb. Yet she's had as much trouble as I have had since the dawn of time. Some of it is in the way that she approaches the business side of things, and other of it is just plain old dumb luck. And sometimes it's having people in your corner that have ability to open doors that you can't yourself. And some of it is just plain old dumb luck, both positive and negative. And I never believed that. I was obstinate in my belief that if you're that good, eventually you'll be heard. But I don't believe that that's necessarily the case anymore. And that's just a reality. And maybe that's naivete on my part for believing so long. But it's just the way it is. And I think that if I let that defeat me, then I'm denying myself all the joy that writing and recording and playing gives me and gives the fans that I have. Maybe it's not the largest fan base, but it's pretty dedicated. And I one of the things that I'm feeling very, very buoyed about and very gratified is, I've decided I'm going to do another record in an era where records don't sell. So the only way I can do it is to either hope for grant money, which is harder and harder to get. If I wait for grants, I could be dead before I make a record. Or you ask the fans that you have to support you. And my friend Susie Ungerleider, Oh Susanna, formerly Oh Susanna, now going under her regular name, she told me about Romy Mays, somebody who, like me, sort of walked away and 9 years for Romy. And I don't know, I've met her, but I don't know her very well. But that this was somebody that decided, I'm going to go back and I want to make a record. And she said very plainly to her fan base, I want to make a record. They're not going to sell. I want to make a great record that sounds great, that, people, to give everything I have, and I need your help. It's as plaintive and as simple as that. And her fan base, who she hadn't engaged in 9 years, responded wonderfully, and is allowing her to make art. It's like, and I thought, that was inspirational for me, to see that and to see, and I thought, well, maybe my fan base, even though I have, walked away from them and not really engaged in half a dozen years, maybe they'll support me. And I started a crowdfunding campaign. It's not even a week old, and I'm halfway to my goal and that is very gratifying, and it tells me that there are people who do value what I do. I think part of the problem in retrospect with rejection comes the feeling of devaluation. At least it does for me, whether it's rejected for grants, for not getting festivals, not able to have, not, being told, no, we're not interested in you for this gig, whatever. You hear that once. When I was younger, it would become like rejection. Rejection fueled me to prove people wrong. And then it started to become, I guess, like plaque. It just built up, and it wore me down. And I no longer, the rejection, it did the opposite. It didn't fuel me. It just dragged me further down. And I think that having the response that I'm been getting just in the last 5 days to the idea of me coming and playing some shows and making another record, and has been so gratifying. It fuels you artistically. It certainly fuels you just in general. Like I haven't felt this optimistic, and I'm not optimistic about music, just generally optimistic in 7, 8, 9 years. And I'm very grateful for that.
It's music is obviously such a part of your soul as it is in mine. But I think the reason that you were able to do so well at it is because you cared about it so much, right? Like, you put so much passion and love into everything you did, and when you put that much effort into something, whatever the perceived reaction is, if it doesn't meet some kind of personal goal, that can be very defeating, like you've talked about. Like, is there a way for you to still put your heart and soul into something and not take it so personally, knowing that the game is rigged? It's not a fair game that you're playing.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that I have to separate two things. Artist's job is to create the art that they want to, as right. Like I never ever made records with, will people like this, right? It was like, you have to approach your art and do it to the best of your ability in the way that you want to, within the constraints. I mean, there's like, for example, if I have a song where I think, man, an orchestra would be great, I can't afford an orchestra. So would a string quartet do? So you do a quartet. Well, then maybe I can't afford a string quartet. Would a cellist do? And so you do have to make artistic decisions around the presentation of your art, music in this case, that do pay attention to the financial constraints, but not. It has been a long time since I ever cut a corner artistically, right? In a way that I'm like, or put something out that I was not happy about. That maybe that it didn't. It may be that I would, in my head, I was like, yeah, there's a beautiful cello. I would have liked this, but I'm happy with the cello. So I think that you have to approach it. How am I going to, given the time and financial parameters that I have, how am I going to make the album, recorded album or recorded song or whatever it is you're doing, or video, in a way that presents me how I want to be presented? And that's how I approached all my records. I actually remember talking to Stephen Fearing about this way back. I'm like, because I thought I liked, not only do I think Stephen Fearing is a wonderful person, but he's a very talented, very consistent performer. His records are consistent. His performance is consistent, and how he carries himself consistent. Now, we talked about it. It's like, and we both agreed at the time, it's like, even though we are relatively successful in our world, neither of us can afford to make a subpar record. Like, larger artists, sometimes you can get away with, oh, that one's not as good, and then the next one's a return to form. If we put out a dud, it's like a career block, You lose a ton. That's how I viewed it. So like every record I made was a stressor to make. Like it was right, but it also allowed me to have that feeling of, I could never rest on any laurels. So even though when we say New Blue Day did really well, I actually think the follow-up record is as strong or equally strong, and whether it was received the same way or not is irrelevant. But I remember approaching, it's like, I can't afford to make a record that's not as good as the previous one. And, and I can look at my records and say, yeah, this is a song that I got as close to what I envisioned in my head or not. Right. And I keep that kind of close to myself, because once you put the flip side is, when I'm making the record, until it is pressed, I can keep making changes. As long as I can tweak it. I can, as long as I can afford, I can. And I remember one record that was done, and I was like, no, I need a mandolin on that song. It had been mastered. Right. And going back to into the mix. So we actually added a mandolin onto the mastered tape and then remixed that on top, as opposed to starting the mix this was with an analog tape. So it wasn't as easy as recalling a mix as it is now. But like, I remember I was like, I was done, and I was like, nope, I need that. It needs. But once it's done, I let go. It's out. It's like an art. It's a piece of art on a wall. What are you going to look and say, I wish I'd added more blue? Well, you can't. It's done. You move on. I'm able to then move on. I can say, because two reasons. Number one, it'll kill you if you obsess about things that are done. But number two, once it is out there, and somebody come up to, say, just for example, you make a record and you're happy with, but say song 8. You're like, man, it's just, I didn't get what I wanted, or it's the weakest song on the record to me. But then song 8, somebody buys it, and that's the song that has the most meaning. What am I going to tell somebody the song that you're telling me has great meaning? I'm going to say, I didn't quite get what I wanted. No, you have no right to do that. You've put it out, and now it is for the listeners in the audience you can have your thoughts and keep them to yourself and whatever. But you have made your record, you put it out, and now it is the audiences and how they interact with it. How I do the songs on performance, on live, is still mine. But on the record, once you've sold it and somebody's bought it, it is their listening experience now. And it is not for me to comment to anybody about what they're getting from it. Whether, if they ask me, which is your favorite song, or what are you, I'll tell them. But I will never, ever, ever correct. If somebody comes and says to me, I like this song best, or I don't like, that's great. That's the role of the artist is to make the art, and the role of the audience member is to then take it and interact and get something from it or not. And so I'm very cognizant. Once the record's over, boom, I always was ready to move on to the next. And when I was younger, I had so many songs. I would be working on a record and I already was planning the next two. I already had songs, and in some ways in the early records, it actually was to the detriment of the records, because I wasn't as present in a couple of them at the start, because I was always thinking about, I'm recording this, but I just wrote this other song that I really am more interested in. Right. I made a conscious effort kind of around record 4 or 5 that once I was making a record, to stop writing until the recording process was done, so that I had focus on the task at hand. And I think it made my records better. I also think, and this is just for it's tangential, my records sound really, really good because of the people I work with, not just the musicians, but I have a relationship with a longtime engineer and co-producer who I don't have a home studio. I have no desire. I've never taken a recording class, or I can't hook up. I can't even make a microphone talk to I can't set up. I can play and I can arrange and I can perform, but I'm not a musical engineer. I found somebody who can say, I want it to sound like this, or I want this, and he can get that for me. And Paul Simon, who is one of my favorites, he says the same thing about Roy Halley, his longtime producer, who produced Simon and Garfunkel and then produced almost all of Paul Simon's solo stuff. And he just said he's the guy that understood me and could get me what I wanted, sonically. And so having found somebody that I trust and I know is simpatico with me on how I want my records to sound without my ability to personally get it was critical.
I guess if you're coming back then, knowing that selling these things is going to be so difficult, like why still want to make an album in the first place? And why want to do it that way? Because when you announced this, so many of our mutual friends said, well, why don't you just record it at home? Or why don't you just do a single or whatever? Like, why is an album recorded that way so important to you?
For me, that's a fantastic question. Several reasons. Number one, from a practical sense, let's do the practical side. There are performance opportunities in this country that are more easily obtained when you have something unique to promote, right? There are certain concert series, folk festivals that I know I'll have more of a chance of succeeding in getting bookings if I have something new in hand. Simple as that. And new in hand doesn't mean a single. New in hand means a recording. Whether that means they're going to sell or not, but what it does imply is that your show is going to have a different component than anything you've done before, because it's obviously going to feature some new songs. And so that's the practical side. Having a new piece of work can attract gigs, can secure bookings that might not otherwise. 2, artistically, I have no desire to do shows and do nothing but songs I've written and tell nothing but stories I've already told. No interest. That would be anathema to me. I have no problem singing many of the songs that I've written before, but do an entire show would get old real quick. So for me, having new material to me just makes it much more fresh, much more honest, much more on the edge of success or not, because there's an element of unknown, and I like that. I think that makes for more and more entertaining performance. And certainly to have new stories to talk about is critical to what I do. And so that's important. And then the last part is that I like writing. When I'm doing this well, I'm at my best when I'm writing and when I'm making a record. And then, I used to think that my strength was in writing and performing, but I do believe there is also a strength in not making records, because never in my life have I been asked to make records for other people, and I'm not even sure I have it in me, because I don't have the technical. I would probably have to do it with someone like my longtime partner Chris, who has the technical skills. But I know how to make my own music sound the way I want it to be presented. And I like that. There's a stress to making records that is unlike any other part of the equation of being an artist, but I also think it's a healthy stress. It's a stress that pushes you. It's a stress that creates significant art. And I think that if I would just say, I'm coming back, I'm just going to do concerts, there would be a component of it that was missing, and that would simply be safe and repetitive. And I don't think that's healthy for anything I do. It needs to have a fresh component to allow me to be at my best. And I don't want to ask people to pay money to come see me play if I'm not able to honestly say I'm at my best, or potentially at my best. That's it.
Now, the flip side, though, is that you've become sort of known for and successful with these cover shows. You did the Lightfoot tribute for many years, and I went and saw your tribute to Simon and Garfunkel. And
that was not mine. The only one thing, and yes, just to clarify, the Lightfoot show was mine. I was the producer, I was the organizer, I invited the artist, I curated all that. I did everything. Whereas with the Simon and Garfunkel show, you saw I'm literally a hired gun.
Well, you were a pretty important hired gun there. Like you were.
Sure, but I don't choose the songs for the most part. I don't make the set list. I literally get to show up and sing songs by my absolute favorite songwriter. It's a different kind of pressure. I felt the pressure when I did the Lightfoot show in terms of ticket sales. I felt the pressure in terms of making sure artists were happy. All I have to do with that show that you saw is literally just come and sing these songs. And if I did nothing but that, if I became a full-time Paul Simon impersonator, I'd be out of it in 6 months.
Well, that was going to be my question, right? Like, so, I mean, you seemed to be having a lot of fun, and obviously there's money to be made there by doing that. So I guess the obvious question is, why not just do more of that? And is it because of the things that you've already mentioned?
Yeah, I think it's novel at the start and would become tedious very quickly to only do that. As it is now, we're doing like 6 shows in the fall, 6 theaters, and then we did the one that you saw at Hughes Room. So that would be 7 shows in 1 year. That would be the most we've ever done. Previously, I think the most we did was 3, maybe, right? And I think that will be great to have that. And basically, I look at it as it augments my own stuff. And you're right. I did towards the end. I would get more questions about the way we feel, the Lightfoot show that I started and co-started and produced, than about my own music. And that was something I resented that. Quite frankly, I began to resent that. Now, it doesn't mean that I wasn't proud of what we were doing with The Way We Feel, and it wasn't financially, it's when you're doing, 500-seat theaters and you're doing 8 shows in 9 days, it can be a nice a bit of money in your pocket for that time of work. But I never wanted to. That's not why I got into this, and it's not why I would come back to this. I have no trouble doing those kind of things as long as it is not the primary focus. And it became the primary focus because my own stuff just was, I couldn't, And so I don't know if I'm going to do that. The Lightfoot show is an interesting one because what we did was very unique. And for people listening to this, it was a show where I invited anywhere from 5 to 12 artists to come and sing Gordon Lightfoot songs with a backing band in their own style. There would be radically different versions of songs. There's some people would do them relatively straight, but some people would take them in very, very odd direction. I mean, Kevin Bright was in the show one year, and he did each night his song was completely different, let alone, right? Gord said to me after, he says, that Kevin Bright, he's very avant-garde. Gord never had a bad word to say about the show. He would call me up and give me his Jory, you missed a chord in the Railroad Trilogy, but he was always very gracious. He never said a bad word. But that was about the Kevin Bright comment was about the closest thing to telling me that he didn't love what he heard at all. But it's different from like the Simon & Garfunkel show where the tunes are relatively straight up. So the Lightfoot show for me had a real freshness artistically because you've got all these wonderful artists putting their own unique artistic take on these wonderful tunes. And so for me, that show was really not just interesting to play in, but I loved listening to it as a listener and a lover of music. And I think now there's a whole bunch of, like, there's a touring John Stinson who I think played on a Lightfoot record in the late 60s. He's got a Lightfoot tribute where he's singing. The Lightfoot band, Gord's band, is out on the road right now with somebody doing straight up versions. The market is saturated for an artist that I have hold in such high regard, but the truth of the matter is that his fan base was dwindling, right? So I don't see a viable market for a show that isn't doing Gord songs straight up when there is that option, and that seems to be what more people want to hear, at least, and more theaters want. I think my show is infinitely more interesting, but that doesn't mean it's infinitely more marketable. And I'm content to just step away. We did it for 20 years. We celebrated Gord at his festival. He came to our show and sang in it for years and years. I did it last fall at the church in Toronto here that he sang it every Christmas. Those had meaning and they made sense to me. I don't see the point in touring it for touring sake with so many other options that are happening. I'd rather just focus on my own and sing in these Paul Simon and Garfunkel shows where the opportunities exist. So, and as you say, I do not want to be known as the guy who does Gordon Lightfoot. And I started to feel like that. And, yeah. Like the Simon Garfunkel show, most people come to it not even knowing who like Matt Barber, a great singer-songwriter. He's the drummer. Brian McMillan Brian's, he's in a group called Kennedy Road. He was in Lowest of the Low. He's got his own career. He's the other guitar player, John Shear. But it really is just about the songs. Like, we're kind of, X, Y, and Z. 70% or 80% of the tickets are sold because the audience like Simon Garfunkel, not because they're fans of mine or fans of John's Sheard, and so that's a totally different thing. And so I don't think I'll ever be known as the guy who does Paul Simon in the same way as I started to become the guy who puts together these Lightfoot shows. I think there's a safety there. I think it will be easier for me to do my own thing concurrent with the Simon Garfunkel show, more so than with the Lightfoot thing. And quite frankly, as the organizer of the Lightfoot thing, it was tons of work, especially when we took it on the road. Like, I'm the one booking plane tickets and advancing shows and doing it. It was a lot of work. And so I'd much rather just focus on my own stuff.
So what is the timeline, and what is the goal with the crowdfunding, and what's your schedule look like?
Timeline. I think I had no idea what to expect with the crowdfunding. I thought it would take 4 or 5 months to raise the needed money. I think it's going to happen earlier than that. I don't have all the songs written yet. I have some. Are
they coming easily? Like, is it riding a bike?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, it is like riding a bike. I didn't know that it would. Partly, my wife and kid were away for March break. They went and visited my wife's stepmom, and I write better when no one's around. So I finished 2 new songs, and I have 2 more that just need lyrics, and they're all ones that I am happy with, and I think are, the one thing is you learn that I learned. When I started out, when I was young, I wrote hundreds of songs. I would finish songs that I knew weren't good just for the, tried to, just keep doing it. He's like, there's something there. I'm going to finish it. And then ultimately every song that I knew wasn't that good got dropped eventually. I learned to recognize when a song is not working, and I put it on tape, I put the idea, and maybe I incorporate it in something else. But I don't tend to, once I'm a music first, lyrics last, as most artists are. There are very few that write lyrics first. Some write lyrics and music concurrently, but a lot of people write music first, lyrics last. I rarely, if ever, if I'm in the lyric writing stage, it's almost assuredly a song that I know is is worthy of being played on stage. So that's years of practice and honing, and that skill did not disappear. So I'm happy with what's coming out, and I've got 4 or 5 months to write the rest. We are recording in the fall. We're talking September, October, November, mixing December, January, and get it manufactured. I have a CD release show already booked in Toronto for end of April, right? And so I'll have to have it in hand by then. So basically I have 13 months to raise the money, finish the songs, record, mix, and get it all in hand and get it out to people. And that's entirely doable. I don't feel any stress surrounding that at all. Any stress. It all to me is, and it's also about like when the studio that I want to use is going to be available, when the my co-producer and engineer will be available, and that is the fall. When I can do it, when I can carve out the time separate from my wife's schedule of work and all that sort of thing. Yep.
So obviously that's the realistic and optimistic. Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, no other dollars come in and you don't meet your goal. How do you keep from taking that personally? And what would you do? Like, would you still soldier on in some way if you weren't able to meet your goal? Or
that's a great question that I don't have to answer. Because 2 days ago, so I'm trying to, I can do this record for $15,000. I've done 4 budgets. The bare bones, if I even have to strip it down, I can do it for 12. It won't be exactly, but I can do a version of these for 12. And it will also mean much less time in the studio for experimentation. I have to be on with the ball. I have to sing well, etc. It doesn't leave any room for error, but I could do it for 12, right? And then the middle one is like 14 to 15, which is where the budget is. And then if I go over and raise more, then the ideal would be, 18, 19. I can spend extra days basically in the studio. If you look on my crowdfund, I just passed the $7,000 mark, and I got a call from a fan who is going to give me $5,000 at the end of August to put towards a record, regardless of what happens with the crowdfunding. So I am at 12, even though the crowdfunding says 7. Now the goal is now to get to 15 to 18, and then, but I know that based on what I've raised just in 5 days with crowdfunding, and what this basically an angel investor is willing to give me, I now have the bare minimum budget to make a record. Now I don't want the bare minimum. I want more, and I believe I'll get there because, I have barely even, like, this is, as you know, like, I've just been pushing on Facebook. I have yet to announce to my old mailing list of, about 1,000. There's some crossover, but there's some people on the mailing list that are not Facebook friends, that are just pure fans. And I have not yet announced to them that the crowdfunding is live. So I have absolute confidence that I will get to, in the end, I'll get to the 14 or 15 level. And hopefully I'll even get, if I get more, it means I can hire more artists or pay artists a little more, or spend an extra 2 or 3 days doing more vocal harmonies or trying different harmonies or trying different guitarists or that sort of thing. It just gives a little bit more flexibility and room for error, and not be just right up against it for every hour of everything. Or I make, instead of the minimum 300 CDs, I press 500 CDs. I do a bigger booklet. There's more money that I can put into the product. And I've always been a fan of making CDs that have liner notes. And you mentioned the artwork. Yeah, like the artwork, it's my favorite artwork of all time. And it was done by a Winnipegger, Roberta Landreth, who is, to my eyes, one of the best working designers out there. That doesn't mean I may use her for this one. I may not be able to afford her. I'm not sure, but I certainly know that if I do hire her and can hire her, the product will be second to none. I just look at her output is consistently amazing. And she's also wonderful to work with. She is such a professional, but an artistic, like she's as good as what she does as a great musician is at the music side. And when you have a really good record that also looks and feels great in your hands, it just adds to the whole, it's part of the whole thing. And that's to me where the idea of singles and digital it can never compete. And maybe, and there, you'll probably get some people will even argue that the CD cannot compete with a record, the way of vinyl, big vinyl record that you would open up and read the notes and read the liner notes as you listen to. I mean, to me, that's an element of the listening experience that the whole business that's dominated by singles and or streaming can never replicate. The power of a wonderfully sequenced album, when it's right, it's to me, it's the nirvana of musical listening experience, And I listen, to me, like there's a couple records. I have a couple, like there's a template sonically that I have in my head for this. And like Amy Mann I'm a huge Amy Mann fan, and not her most recent one, I was a bit disappointed in it. But the one before it was called Mental Illness. It is a 33-minute opus that is a coherent listening experience, right? And the sonics are great. I think the same thing about Sufjan Stevens' album Carrie and Lowell. Just absolute, like I have to stop what I'm doing and listen to the record from start to finish. And the feeling when an album like that and what it does to me, that's the goal I'm trying to give to people. Now, they may not listen that way. Some people just don't listen. Some people listen, put it on shuffle, and that's great. But for those who do listen the way that I listen, if I do my job right, they're going to get something out of my records that Joni Mitchell, Court and Spark, Joni Mitchell, Hey Yira. These records, when I listen to them, I have to stop. Jeff Buckley's Grace. These are records that when I listen, I have to listen to the whole thing. I have to stop what I'm doing and say, I'm going to carve out 45 minutes and sit and listen to this. And that, when I do Fleet Foxes, their debut full-length record, that's another one that I'm standing in front of my CD collection because I still have CDs. I have a wall of CDs that I like looking at them like people like looking at books. New Pornographers, Twin Cinema. That's another one that to me is just like a masterpiece, start to finish. Sarah Harmer's You Were Here. That's another, there's just so many records. And I'm not even mentioning all of the landmark records of the 60s and 70s and 80s that fundamental to my youth, like every Beatles record, half the Rolling Stones, the Who's Next, these are because they're so ingrained. But I'm trying to find sort of modern, more recent examples of records that Laurie Cullen's Buttercup Bugle for me is another one that just like these are records. And so that's my goal, to make whether the audience listens to it that way or not. That is what I'm trying to do. And so that is why I think and only am interested in making albums, full length recordings. Whether that's it.
It's been fun this week, kind of going back and listening to your records again and kind of getting reacquainted. And
oh, thanks, man. And it's funny because I do that sometimes too, like just to remember what I was doing. And sometimes actually for the concert I did in November, I had to listen to my own records to try to relearn. It's like, what the hell was I? There are some songs. Listen, I was like, why didn't I write down? Because I don't have, I have very rudimentary, music theory. So I never wrote my stuff down. I don't, like tablature. I honestly, there's a couple of tunes. I have no idea what I'm doing. There's one tune on an early record that I know is in an alternate tuning. I don't remember the tuning. I couldn't play it if you paid me. Like I could listen to it for days and still have no idea how to play my own damn tune. And so I kick my own ass, younger ass, for not doing a better job of writing down or getting somebody to at least maybe do tablature for my songs. So there's I sometimes get requests for songs. Can you play them? I'm like, nope, I can't. I literally can't because I don't know what I'm doing. And then there's, and this is like any artist, there's a few, like your range, as your vocal range, especially with men, you do tend to lose some of your upper range as you get older. So there's a few tunes that I simply, either if I'm going to play them, I have to drop them a tone or two, and then they don't sound quite right, or I simply can't sing them. Because I've lost about a note and a half off the top end of my range.
Well, you could have fooled me. I certainly didn't notice anything, but sounded great.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really good to talk to you and good to have you back doing it. You know what? I would never blame somebody for walking away from music. It's a fucked up industry. It just makes no sense to me. But so how anybody does it, I don't know. But
well, you just can't. You have to. You can't. Very, 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 very few people can do it sustainably for a long period of time. Very few. Just not enough. It's almost like professional sports. Like how many people play hockey in this country until they're 15 or 16 when they realize they ain't going to make the NHL, right? Like what, half of 1% of the people playing it actually play professionally, whether that's NHL or Europe or AHL or, and I think in music, it's the same. There's just an absolute tiny amount of people will be able to do it sustainably for a long period of time. Some people will be able to do it for a short period of time. And some people will never be able to. And I think now it's even harder. I happen to have the bulk of my career in the one age where people could make and manufacture their own recording and sell their own recording in relatively mass quantities. That didn't happen in the 50s and 60s. If you weren't on a record label, you couldn't be a professional musician. It wasn't until the CD, and it wasn't until the Ani DeFrancos of the world and the Dar Williams kind of showed a template that independent artists can actually do this and engage their fans directly. The internet and the CD kind of for 10 to 15 years were hand in hand in allowing more people than traditionally have been allowed to make a living playing music, popular music. And so that is not the case now. And so I'm at this stage of my life. That's not the goal anymore. I'll get a lot of gig interest in the next year and a half because I haven't been around for a while, but that will dissipate. The goal here is to find enough gigs to make recording. I'll say one, maybe I'll do another one, but I'm going to focus on one for now that allow me to feel positive about being an artist again. That's the overarching goal. And that's it.
Well, it's too bad that it requires so much from other people to make you feel the kind of success that I think you should feel just because of the talent and the passion that you put into it. And it's
I appreciate that. I do, and I thank you for that. But I also will say, like, if you go back 300 years, how did the Bachs and Beethovens of the world exist? They had patrons, who bankrolled their writing, and they didn't make much writing. Work was commissioned and that's how they were able to live. Not from touring around and it was with the support of much wealthier patrons. That was it. And because of it, so much great art was created and there's a legacy and lasted. So in some ways we've come, it's relatively circular, right? and for people who are starting now, that's the reality that they know. They don't know the reality of that I went through, where you could record and sell, and you'd do a show, and like I remember hearing that Martin Sexton, who's a terrific performer, just one of the most incredible live performers I've ever seen. Records were hit and miss, and even within a record they were uneven, right? But his performance was riveting. He played like the Summer Folk Festival one year and sold out of CDs. They had to fly down 500. He sold 900 CDs on Sunday afternoon. 900 CDs at $20, $18,000 in CD sales at one festival. Nowadays an artist won't sell 900 CDs in a year. It's a different world. And so that's the world that I happen to be lucky enough to be a part of for a brief period of time. And I think that 6 or 7, 8 years ago, it's like a breakup or a relationship. It's like there's stages of grief and, denial and anger or whatever. There was a denial that the world was changing. Well, for now it's changed. And for anybody starting now, this is the world. So they're either going to figure out a way to make it work in this new way, whether that's through patronage, whether it's through video, whether it's through song placement, whether it's through monetizing the TikToks and the YouTubes of the world, whatever. Or you do it until you say, I need to get a real job. And that's just the reality. And the reality can change again. 5 years from now, things might change in a way that we don't even know. I look back, it's very funny. Like there's certain artists that have fingers on the pulse of where they're at, and certain artists that have a finger on the future in ways that they can see. And David Bowie, you listen to some of his like prognostications about what the internet and artificial intelligence, and way ahead of his time. Like so much of what he was saying 10, 15 years ago in interviews. Frank Zappa was another one, just seemed to have an idea. Jim Morrison in 1969 gave an interview about basically spelling out the internet. And I don't have that. I don't have the presence. The first time I saw the internet when I was in university, I thought, what? It's taking 10 minutes for us type a message, and why don't you just pick up the phone and call them? This is the dumbest. I remember being in university thinking the internet was the stupidest thing that this is like, what is, I am not somebody who has a finger on the pulse of what the future is going to be I tend to be relatively behind the times most of my life. So I don't know what it's going to be, but all I think is that I'm kind of finally adapting to the world that is, and it ain't the world that was. So I can lament about it, or I can figure out a way to at least try to carve out some semblance of being the kind of artist I want to be without it making me go insane. And that's kind of where I'm at. So I don't want to say it's low expectations or reduced expectations.
Well, more realistic ones.
But I think it's more, I think it's more realistic expectations about what I can realistically take from the business as it is now.
And again, it's not a personal thing. It's not a reflection of your talent or anything that you've done wrong necessarily. It's just it's a crazy, crazy industry.
That is exactly right. And that will be my hardest thing. Will be I understand it, but to accept it. I was not able to accept it 6-7 years ago when I walked away. I'm hopeful that I will be able to understand and accept that now and carve out a different kind of musical career.
Well, I certainly wish you well with it. It's exciting, to have you back out there again. I felt a bit of a loss in my life when you stepped away. Again, I never blamed you. It's certainly not your fault, but it when I got that email from you, I cried. I was so sad that somebody so talented could get to that place where it was you were bitter and resentful about something that brought you and so many others so much joy. It felt so sad to me. So it's good to have you feeling optimistic and hopeful and creative again.
Thank you. I think it's really important for me to not forget that an artist cannot exist without people to hear their art. They can exist in a vacuum and play for themselves, but if they're going to, and that if I think I forgot or didn't understand that when I walked away, I think it came from a selfish place, and I need to remember that I brought people on this musical journey with me, and I perhaps what I did was an abandonment in a way. And yeah, I appreciate you saying you didn't blame me, but I think that had I been open-eared enough to hear what you just said to me, then maybe it would have knocked a little more sense into me. I don't know. But I do need to recognize that I am playing these concerts for people, and I'm making this music and it's being heard by people, and that it's not just a one-way street, right? And so the listener is as important to the process as the creator. Whatever it is they get out of it, if they get something, then I owe it to them to try to keep going.
Well, you owe it to yourself too, and your family. And
so thank you for I owe it to myself, but I've always been very, I don't think I've until you framed it just the way you just did, I don't think I truly was cognizant that my stepping away mattered to people other than me or my wife or immediate, I think so. It's a bit humbling, and also it's important. So thank you for it's kind of it's got a bit of gravity to what you just said to me, and that I need to take that to heart.
I can't afford to record all our new songs and to put them on the Spotify if it is wrong. Everybody wants music for free, so you ain't gonna buy my brand new CD.
One thing that I did get around to talking to Jory about is his steadfast refusal to place his music on streaming services like Spotify, which exploit and underpay artists for their work. So if you're looking to hear Jory's music, you'll have to do it the old-fashioned way by buying it directly from him. Just go to his website, jorynash.com, JORYNASH.com. There and at flywithyourshadow.com, you'll find a link to support Jory's GoFundMe campaign and help him make his new album. If you like this show, you might want to join me on my radio show as well, Tell the Band to Go Home. That originates Sunday afternoons on CJUM 101.5 UMFM in Winnipeg. This week I plan to play more of Jory's music, as well as some of the artists and albums that were mentioned in this episode. You can find out more about the music used in this episode and Jory, and find other episodes at flywithyourshadow.com. Fly With Your Shadow is and always will be free without ads or any requests for money from me. The one thing that you could do to help support the show is to share this episode with people who might enjoy it. Finding new listeners is one of my biggest challenges, so your help would be greatly appreciated. Just go on social media and share a link, or tell a friend about the show and help build an audience. I appreciate hearing from listeners, so if you have any questions or comments or feedback or suggestions, drop me a line at flywithyourshadow@gmail.com. My name is Jeff Robson, and I sincerely thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope you'll join me again on the next episode of Fly With Your Shadow.
You can tell all my friends that I ain't coming home. Say what you want, but I ain't coming home. We're calling the law for to break down the door.